Welcome to the Forest Garden Podcast. Today we'll be interviewing Adam Crowe of ʻāina Exotics, based in Papaʻaloa, Hawaii. In this episode, we are hoping to delve into the permaculture orchard design elements of Adam's rare fruit farm. I know you, Adam, have been cultivating for some time, growing exotic fruits that many people have simply never heard of. Today, we're going to dive in and nerd out on some of these really cool and really rare tropical fruits and perennials that you've been cultivating. For our listeners, Ben and I are based in a roughly USDA 6B borderline 7A climate zone, whereas Adam is stewarding land in something closer to a zone 11 or 12 climate zone, which is something to keep in mind when we talk about perennial plants on this podcast. Adam's farm is based on Big Island in Hawaii, about a 40-minute drive north from Hilo. In this podcast, we frequently discuss cold-hardy perennial plants for resilient systems, but today we're going to jump into the world of cultivating perennial plants in an edible forest garden designed in the heart of a Hawaiian tropical paradise.
It's not bad.
Adam, could you, since we're just meeting now, could you just give me a brief background on how you ended up in Hawaii and sort of what you're doing out there?
Yeah, sure. I've been out here since I was in about second grade. In the islands, I moved to Big Island and got some land in around 2012. So I've been working on this system since then. I'm a musician as well, and I put most of my time into that before I came out here and did plants and got, obsessed with them and went down this deep rabbit hole. Yeah, I'm working for the plant team now pretty much all the time. They don't let me do much else. It's just how it is.
What sort of plants do you, if you were to say that you specialize, or do you mainly work with edible fruits and vegetables, or how would you classify like the types of things, the plants and things that you're interested in?
Yeah, I did kind of focus most of my energy into edibles over these last years. I did, I studied permaculture and went through that, and that definitely had a pretty transformative effect on my installation process and how I went about getting around some of the problems that were surfacing and really going to the drawing board and figuring out how to deal with some of these obstacles, which were sort of seeming insurmountable in the early phases. And permaculture helped me to surmount some of them and make my progress steady. And so now I'm really focusing on, at first I was really focusing on sort of food security mentality and just getting a lot of the, Hawaii has these great canoe plants, which are like the taro and we call it kalo, and a lot of the starchy tubers, sweet potatoes and the bananas and the sugar cane. And that stuff all grows real well. So you can sort of boost your confidence in your growing efforts out here if you, follow the role of what worked here. And then after a while, you start to go, maybe I could grow cabbage, or there's this guy down the road who's growing this, and then you start to be like, man, I got to figure out what seeds are going to do good and what varieties, and then that just becomes something you could just indefinitely obsess over and research, probably, and so I really got into vegetables and figuring out how to grow just regular vegetables you buy at the supermarket. And then in the process of that, I was always just obsessed with edible perennials and collecting as many as I could, stuff that would, be from places that might not be things that people hadn't really tried out here, things that people told me I couldn't do. I tried extra hard to figure out how to do and just failed a lot of times. And yeah, it's kind of just how it's been. Tropical agriculture is very challenging. And do you have experience with it at all? Michael was saying you actually have some interesting plants yourself from the tropical lands.
I've always been interested in tropical plants just because the diversity is pretty staggering in the tropical world. And
Yeah.
I read a book called The Fruit Hunters probably over a decade ago. The author travels the world to discover new and interesting fruits and interview the people who collect them and grow them. And it really opened my eyes to what's out there. So I just dove in and learned as much as I could. And I've traveled to a couple different tropical countries, to places probably kind of similar to your site, where you just have people who love to grow, collecting all sorts of different plants from around the world. So I try to grow whatever I can. Sometimes that's an annual here in Chile zone 6, but I intend to make it down to the tropics again soon. So I'm curious, you mentioned that you had some challenges early on and maybe you still have challenges in your climate. What did you learn, any like takeaways or tricks on how to get away with growing some of those like those vegetables that people say you can't grow, whether that's cabbage or cool season vegetables? Like, do you have any tactics or techniques you can share to grow some of those challenging plants?
And wait, before we even get into that, we should have Adam sort of describe to our listeners the challenges that exist in a tropical climate, because we in zone 6, we don't have to deal with things like pigs or fire ants. And I think we should even, before, preamble to that question is like, what are the obstacles?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's true. The things that led me to really have to go to the drawing board, like you mentioned, were the feral pigs. They have a sort of way of rooting in the ground around anything that you mulch. So, all the rules, all the great things that I had like learned, were just based around like mulch and straw and wood chips and, all these methods of making like these low maintenance, like long lasting edible systems. I had like, okay, I got it now, and then that's basically like just putting out like a huge bait of dinner for pigs, and they just come through and they just nose all the earthworms, and they just, your worms are gone, and it's a whole mess. And then also what they like to do is mark their territory by girdling your most prolific, valuable grafted fruit trees.
Oh my God.
So, you got 4 years in and this is popping and this is kicking. And then you go out one day and it's just like your prized mango is just like girdled, or your breadfruit, which would have provided like thousands of pounds of food for me by now, is set back indefinitely. And so these sorts of things are still happening, but then, you get proper fencing, you get proper, like in our case, we got sheep net fencing, and we have cows that, go into the landscape and graze down the really tall grasses. And then once they've done their grazing, it's by no means like clean, but you can work in it, as opposed to just what it would be otherwise is you're attacking it with, a grass blade weed eater, or bringing in like a mini excavator or something, to deal with this grass, because it's a challenging mat of grass.
You should also mention that the grass that you're dealing with is, considerably more, it's a different breed of grass than what most Americans are used to.
Yeah. Some of the Floridians might know about it, but Guinea grass is one of those grasses that was brought out as a forage, and it hopped the fence and basically made its way into all the landscapes, almost in all the lower elevation areas of the islands. It grows 4 inches a day, which is great for cattle. It's great for cattle, but like if you're like planting, these food systems and stuff, all but the hardiest and most vigorous of plants just don't stand a chance without really consistent levels of weeding that are almost, beyond reason. But it's really important, you get it early on and just weed it over and over again, and eventually you produce shade, and shade is really what you strive for in these in these systems. Otherwise, the perennial peanut is a great ground cover if you can establish that. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's one of those ones that it's tricky to establish some of these things in strictly organic contexts, and the labor is really troublesome. But you get a patch going and keep it weed free, and then you have a patch you can sort of spread out from that. And a lot of people will do orchards out here with exclusively the perennial peanut, and it just looks real nice. It keeps a nice low mat. So it's basically like do the shade, like get shade as quickly as possible, or use like a dependable ground cover like that and slowly like get it established. And then sorry, so you mentioned like what vegetables are good when you've dealt with some of these like obstacles, which in that case is related to our rain primarily, right? We get like over 100 inches some years. So we're looking for crops that are gonna be able to handle the sun and handle the rain, and it was challenging to find heirloom vegetables that would do it for us in context to like the cool season vegetables and things that are more like your supermarket vegetables. Like we could always find cool, unique tropical crops to try to grow, but you're kind of looking for keywords like heat tolerant varieties, like fusarium wilt resistance, bacterial wilt resistance, any of those fungal diseases or things that cause damping off, or like you try to prevent those by keeping stuff clean or whatever in your nursery. But it's challenging, but once you have bacterial wilt, like we got it in our vegetable garden, now any tomato we try to plant will just liquefy and perish,
Oh.
It's a horrible situation.
Are the heat stress and too much moisture, humidity, rainfall causing diseases and pathogens? Would those two be the main challenges to growing vegetables in your area?
Yeah, for the most part. If you got your area like fenced in well and stuff, and you protect it from the feral pigs, you can work, maybe make beds that are sort of elevated and water kind of drains down the pathways a little bit. Like some things, if it's kind of sitting flat out here, it can get pretty muddy and swampy. And when those big storms do come, I mean, I know farmers who have lost like $30,000 crop overnight from like a heavy rain, and it just washes through the farm, So there's challenges like that are, more on the catastrophic side. But like, I guess when it comes to the crops, like integrity and stuff, we also happen to have more pests out here than anywhere in the USA per square mile. The Big Island of Hawaii takes the cake. So that is always something to consider when you're doing your vegetable gardening. And so we've done like soil amending, like based on our soil tests, doing specific amending and really like trying to keep like minerals and microbes in check, and really just strategizing on that front and combining that with research into the proper varietals that are disease resistant. And then, sometimes just finding something that's like pretty good and then saving the good ones over a few years, and kind of watching it just get better and better too. Any of the heirlooms that have worked for us, it's like they become their own little grail of a find, because we do grow hybrids just to like have food that's like gonna work. You know what I mean? For sure. It's like always
of plants that are kind of adapted to your area, even if maybe they didn't originally come from seed sources in Hawaii, or maybe they did, but in either case you're kind of filtering for which ones can tolerate the conditions and can stand up to some of those pests and disease and heat and moisture.
And
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Adam, before, like, on that note, I mean, something we've talked about in the past is how long it took to just find a tomato that really,
Yeah.
settled in your landscape. And to most Americans living on the East Coast, West Coast, whatever, like everyone can grow tomatoes, So I think that might be an interesting story as to how many trials and tribulations you went through just to get that tomato that really worked.
Yeah. It's funny when you put your mind to something like that, and we've kind of pulled it off for like most different crops. We've got that one thing that works. But for tomatoes, I gotta say, like growing those heirloom tomatoes is one of the things I miss like most, because I did grow vegetables in Northern California for a while and grew those like big, juicy summertime Cherokee purples and like just stuff that's off the hook, and I miss it, and I just have accepted that I won't get to have that experience out here,
Yeah.
But the greenhouse people pull it off. Like you can set up a house out here, and it has to be a little different design and airflow and stuff. And you can grow all that stuff. And most likely people are spraying like whatever organic stuff they can if they're trying to do it without chemicals to pull it off. So we've just found something that like we don't have to fuss with and do much with, that we've been saving seeds for. It's actually a Baker Creek score. It's the German lunchbox tomato.
Huh.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend it though to everybody. It'll do great for anywhere, I bet. And it forms these they're just a bit smaller than like a smaller Roma maybe, but they're big and they form in like these big clusters, and they're really they never get stung by the fruit flies like most other stuff does. But I've also grown some decent slicers. Like I did like a ton of research on these Korean breeding programs where they're like growing stuff out in Vietnam and other places. And there's this variety called Tropic Boy that I guess is based off of like Better Boy, and they bred it out in the tropics, and that thing holds up pretty well as a slicer. Yeah.
Very cool. So we could talk about the tomato varieties that didn't work at your spot all day. I'm interested in, you were talking about like the complete deluge of rain that you guys get up in Hamakua, which for our listeners, Hamakua is an area of the northern coast of Big Island. And to most people in a temperate climate, we just do not have to deal with the sort of obstacles that you have to deal with. So like when preparing your site, or when you acquired the site and then decided like this is going to be the setup, did you make any sort of like land augmentation to deal with the could $30,000 loss of washing away your old orchard problem?
Yeah. A lot of the time in permaculture, when people learn about it, the swales are brought up a lot. I did a lot of research on that and then just kind of came to the conclusion like, oh man, maybe swales aren't really for me. And you start to kind of talk to people all around, and people are like, what? Swales, like, you mean for the driveway? And it's kind of a trip. Like you start to realize like, oh, you maybe instead of retention, you sort of should be looking at like diversion, like in like a realistic way. A lot of you'll see like in Southeast Asia and stuff where they grow durian and some of these really important tropical tree crops. That's really what I'm mainly into, is all that stuff. So I got lucky, and when you go to the part of the property where I'm growing a lot of this stuff, there actually is an old diversion from like sugarcane days. So it actually takes water away that would kind of, otherwise often wash away a lot of the soil that I'm building with these systems, because when you produce shade, it's like there's going to be a lot of exposed dirt, and there's going to be exposed dirt when you're starting the system, because I'll till it just to get it started and then plant it all up and fill it in. And then once it fills in, a lot of the ground covers that I planted kind of die off and taper off. So then if those big rains come and sweep down we're basically on just a foothill all the way from Mauna Kea to the ocean. So the water just goes downhill. And in these big storms, if you look out in the landscape, you just see a flow of water that just covers the ground like for several inches, just moving like a sheet along the whole landscape, so that kind of thing is it's you got to just see it to like believe it. And when you talk about like preparing for something like that, like, man, it's like, it's really like you start thinking like, I really need to think about my roads and my like, infrastructure and different things like that start to take precedence sort of over some of the like water infiltration methodologies that you thought you would be like pursuing, yeah, for me, like it was sort of, illuminating to realize that like I need to, just get plants in the ground and obviously prevent soil erosion as the most important thing, and not really focus as much on some of these principles that I thought I would,
Swales don't do everything, I guess.
They're not for everybody, and you don't really get that like memo either. It's kind of like it just is this golden lore that they're just the best thing. But I'm not saying there's parts of this island that can obviously hugely benefit from swale work, but I don't feel like terraces are great out here because you get to kind of feel like you can walk around on flat ground sometimes.
One question is I kind of always knew that swales wouldn't be the kind of perfect answer to all of the water infiltration or runoff issues, but in your situation, you described a lot of water rushing downhill and sweeping away any bare soil and how big of a problem that is. I'm wondering, do you think a swale uphill that would help capture some of that runoff before it is able to kind of pick up speed and pick up soil and trying to infiltrate that like further upslope? Would that help at all, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my original design plan was basically to get a pond going at the top of the property and have like swales that connected a couple of tiers that brought the water down. And I think if you retained it like in that sense, where you had ponds and had like stuff that slowed stuff down, it would work. I think on a more kind of passive level though, like I wouldn't shoot for like big drainage. I'm sorry, I wouldn't shoot for big swales because you're creating, like when water hits that, it becomes quite a momentous thing. So this kind of, the smaller it is and the more passive it is, I think there's less of a chance of kind of getting it wrong, because out here it's just like it's such a critical volume of water that like if you sort of were in your early stages of trialing these things like I was, I could have probably screwed something up and had a bunch of water like rush down towards my neighbor's house or something, you know what I mean?
It's interesting that in your landscape, water, which is something that you care so much about, and in my landscape, is like so coveted, in places that are experiencing drought. Right. A drought for you is so very different from most of the U.S., but water can become the enemy. It can become an obstacle in your, and that's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, I hear you. It's interesting out here that we are getting what we call droughts. Stuff stays green, but it definitely is scarce rain. And it's really challenging because I just plant I plant as if the rain's got my back when I go to sleep. And in those periods of drought, it just means all my efforts and plantings and different things I do just turn into me outside with a hose for like 3 hours a day, No,
and I know that right after this meeting, you have to go and do that. So
absolutely,
I apologize.
It goes down. No,
but why don't we get into the fun part of this little interview here, which I am mostly going to defer to Ben, who has way more tropical plant knowledge than I do. But we are interested in I don't know, if you could come up with some of your top favorites of the things that you're growing, the stuff that you took a while to source, the stuff that people who are just your average gardener do not know about, like durian or mame sapote or whatever you choose to talk about. I'm just going to sit back and listen, and I'm hoping that Ben here is going to have lots of questions, because I know that that's going to be the case.
Yeah. Tropical trees we're talking about are definitely something that is, my primary obsession and collective endeavor. I have friends out here who just happen to be really amazing collectors, and they were in it for like a decade before I got out here. And so I was lucky in that sense. And then I have friends now that are, just doing like way more than I could ever have imagined myself doing. And so just seeing them do it, and it's just kind of, this island is just turning into like the craziest, most amazing tropical fruit collection in the world. And it's just something to behold. We have a facility over here that started bringing in like durians and langsat and some of these different things recently from all over the world, because they got it approved to have like this quarantine facility. So that's going to be fun. We're going to have a bunch of new durian cultivars to play with once they're quarantined for 2 years. And so I got into that durian family of things, and started to realize there's all these species in the families. And I ended up doing research into subspecies of kind of all the different exotic fruits that, most people have heard of or haven't. And so when someone asks me like, what do you grow? I'll sort of be like, have you ever heard of a rambutan? And a lot of people are like, no. And then, if they're like, yes, then I can say, okay, have you ever heard of a yellow rambutan? Or the, Latin names, like I think we have anonas growing, and a lot of people have heard of soursop. So if they say soursop, I'll be like, okay, have you heard of Annona deliciosa, Rollinia? Is a Annona, which is a lemon meringue pie fruit, they call it. And so we have a few of those trees, and they always just completely blow people's mind. Just that fruit alone, it has a lemon meringue pie taste. And so you find out there's all these different fruits like related to the top dog of that family. And you sort of go down the list and go, okay, what sounds like it would do good in my environment? You start realizing that maybe in the family, there's like a common rootstock that you can use in grafting, and so not everybody knows, but a rootstock is a seedling that you plant, and then you put a good variety on it, and it turns into a better thing than it would have been if you hadn't. And so you find out that, like, for instance, jaboticaba is an excellent little fruit that tastes like Concord grapes. Big shout out to jaboticaba. There's like over 100 types of it, with all these unique little variations in foliage and flavor and fruit. And you can graft almost all of them onto a common rootstock called sabara. And so you can look around and find out that there's people who are collecting this, and it kind of is just that one fruit. Like, you could dedicate your life to it and never probably find all the different varieties if you traveled the world. And so then you find out there's like a book that's in Portuguese, written by this guy in Brazil, and it's like an Atlantean, not Atlantean, sorry. It's an Atlantic forest tree. And then you find out that in the Atlantic forest, there's all these other kind of sister trees, and it's just endless, and it's amazing. And then you find out they all have these, excellent flavors and unique profiles, and it's just absurd that we don't have access to more of them in supermarkets. But that's why you got to move out to places in the world that have these things, or go out to them. And we're lucky in Big Island. People are lucky in South Florida. There's some pretty amazing collections out there, for people who want to make the pilgrimage that are on the U.S. mainland. There's people selling the fruit now out of South Florida. There's like Miami Fruit and some of these companies, which, for quite a substantial price, you can get some of these cool, interesting fruits. But so we're just getting into collecting and being able to propagate them in our nursery. And we're starting to you know, get more of a collection going that we could sell. But I've just been trying to get them in the ground and keep them healthy. And yeah, so sorry if I went on there, but
Adam, you're
that's the gist of that.
Hearing about all these fruits. I've only tried one or two types of durian before, but I know there's, like you said, there's the top dog that maybe not everyone has heard of, but people are starting to hear about, like soursop or durian. But then as you get in, you start to realize there's these other related species or different cultivars that are sometimes wildly different than the one that maybe more people have heard about. Like there's a red fleshed durian, there's some orange fleshed durians, and just some small ones crosses with related species, or so it just seems like it goes on forever. And sure enough, when I join, one thing I like to do is join Facebook groups related to plant species or plant families, and the amount of dedicated individuals, probably a lot in Hawaii, that collect and propagate and grow and share, it's staggering. And people just want to connect on there and share photos and advice on how to grow some of these things. So yeah, I'd recommend for people who want to learn more about these fruits to join a social media group about them. Yeah, you mentioned jaboticaba. I've never tried one, but I bought a little tiny plant on eBay, and I've got it growing. I've got a red jaboticaba plant growing on my porch. But
cool.
Doing too well. The climate in Missouri is a little different than climate in.
Yeah.
See if I can keep it alive. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So other than the ones that you mentioned, are there any fruits that you would say are your favorite, whether that's a cultivar of a particular type of fruit or just a species in general? And then the second question would be, are there any ones that you want to try or want to grow that you haven't yet?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. That second, I could go on that second question. I have a lot of different fruit. Some of the family that I really treasure is the Artocarpus family, which is jackfruit, relatives. The Chempadec is just one of the most explosive, wonderful tasting fruits you could imagine.
I had a chance to try the Chempadec in Costa Rica, and it tasted like kind of marshmallowy. The texture was just very interesting and so delicious. I only got to have one bite. One fruit had to. Wish I could try more.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where you got to stop yourself and just slow down and really let it jump out of the juice, out of the flesh into your mouth, and just some of those fruits in that family are just explode. Like they all say juicy fruit gum was inspired by jackfruit, right? And so there's this kind of I think there's this deep mechanism that fires off in the American brain, maybe where it's just like it hits that juicy fruit receptor, and that is fulfilled, and then you get this other mechanism that's like something completely new, and you just can't even fathom it or something. Because there's this other one in that family called Keladang, and it's kind of like a Chempadec, but has this fire truck red flesh. And I had one of those, and it just it was a journey into a flavor place that my mind just couldn't even form words for. And I still can't define it, so there's stuff like that where, I've heard this or that about different fruits. I had a maprang the other day, which is kind of like a little mango-y relative. I don't know if it's actually officially related, but it's very similar to mangoes. A mango I kind of judge by the juiciness and low fiber or whatever. And some of these fruits, they don't really check the box of low fiber, but the flavor profile of some of the mango relatives, like kasturi is one of them, that just tastes like passion fruit. Wow. Intermingled with some other crazy maybe orange dream beverage that you used to drink as a kid, merges into these mythical places where all of a sudden, it doesn't matter that it has fiber. You just have this big thing in your mouth and it's just fulfilling all your taste bud receptor,
I love that.
things. And I could go on and on. There's some of these fruits you just can't even form words for. And
Adam, if I could interject, I'm interested in some of the and please don't let me defer away from Ben's two-part question, because I still want to know the fruits that you haven't grown. That was a question I had myself. But you once told me about some fruits that grow on Big Island in your tropical climate, or Big Island has many microclimates. You mentioned that there were Asian pear growing in like Hilo area without any cold climate, like any chill hours. Have you ever thought about experimenting with cultivars of fruits that are generally not grown in the tropics and somehow succeed out there?
Yes, that sounds like the kind of thing I do get into. I've seen people fruit some things that people wouldn't expect to work, for sure. And we're lucky we have this place that brings out a lot of varieties from, I believe it's Dave Wilson Nursery. And if you actually go on his website, there's a lot of low chill varieties, but it doesn't say no chill. It's like a bold statement when you say no chill for some of these temperate crops. And there's, apple out here we have, that's the ʻāina. I think the golden dorset, they will all fruit a little bit at elevations that you'd be surprised. And I was blown away somewhat. This was kind of a Facebook once-off you mentioned about the Asian pear. There was some lady who had, she was like, "What fruit is this? What cultivar do you think it is? It's a pear." People slowly figured out that it was this Asian pear that kind of looks like an apple kind of in shape, more than a pear. It definitely was a curious enough thing for me to where I like researched it in a crazy way until I found like an image online where that looked like it. And then I went and I found it at some nursery and I ordered an Asian pear. And so now I actually have that in a pot growing, and hopefully it will be the same thing and not just like, my obsession of wasting money on random plants that might not actually produce fruit. But it's something that I do like to try. And I've tried like blueberries and all the berries, and I've tried I haven't tried a lot of stone fruit, but I will try more and more as I like see proof with my own eyes of it like working.
Yeah, you got to leave cold climate garden or something to hang on to as you can.
Man, I just look forward to like seeing your guys' world out there, and I love berries, and I miss a lot of that summertime stone fruit magic for sure. Peaches, oh my goodness! But you guys have unique challenges up there that I'm sure I'm gonna dig my head into someday. And I've read a lot of great stuff on those systems out there, and I'd love to make a temperate system with all kinds of cool stuff. You guys are collecting the plants before I get out there. I'm happy about that. So kudos to you.
I see your method. No, all right, well, so let's jump back to Ben's question about like, as a perennial permaculture rare fruit enthusiast in the tropics on Big Island, if you could be, those few rare fruits you haven't tested yet, as you were saying, like for the temperate climates, for me, it's like, yellowhorn, like a nut tree, and gumi, which I haven't grown yet. But for you, the list is endless. So if you could just say like top 3 maybe of things you'd like to grow out there and you haven't yet, I think that'd be cool.
And it has to be edibles?
Good question. I mean, I guess nitrogen fixation. Well, I mean, think about the things that we're most interested in. And when I say we're, I mean Ben and myself and potential listeners who are most interested in permaculture systems, plant breeding, rare, interesting plants. I mean, for me, another thing I'd like to be growing out here more is Siberian pea shrub. It is a nitrogen fixer, but it's also edible. So
Right.
it doesn't necessarily have to be rare edible fruits, but I guess, it's up to you. Whatever the thing is on your mind.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because there's a lot like from the like desert island outlook. It would be one thing, and then stuff that I'd like to try to grow that I haven't yet. It's a very broad amount of things. I'm really sort of enamored by some of the plants that are used for caffeine maybe, or have different pharmacological properties. Obviously, the ones that come to mind, like right off the top, that I'm really stoked about is like a plant that has a lot of promise in the tropics. I think guayusa is an amazing plant. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's a Amazonian plant in the yerba mate family. It has theobromine like cacao does, and it also has caffeine, but it also kind of has these unique compounds, and it has a long-lasting energy profile that doesn't really have a marked come down of any sort. And it just has a feeling about it. It's really good. And people use it also in lucid dreaming. And it's kind of a plant ally. It has this kind of mythical, quality in the folklore about it. It's just a really interesting plant. It's actually used in different Amazonian brews, and things like that really make me kind of like, oh, I got to make sure I get that in my collection and propagate that out and preserve it and whatever. And as far as fruits go, there's just so many things that are in like those families that I mentioned where I'm just waiting to try it, and it's an amazing thing. But then it's not like stirring my whole, like, it's weird when you get like in a relationship with a plant. Like I feel like by drinking guayusa, I established I dried the leaves, I collected it, and I got this kind of message from it that was like, hey, I could be a part of your life. And I'm like, hey, you could, couldn't you? And maybe it's just an extremely addictive property of the caffeine or something, but like to me, that's cool. There's like something talking to me in that plant. So that kind of eclipses some of the fruits I wish to collect. But I got like naranjia recently. I like that. It's thornless. That's very cool. The solanaceous fruits are always really interesting to me because they have that attribute where they're often readily fruiting in a few years, or a year even, or less. And so I like planting stuff in the landscape like that. That's like instantly gratifying. So I'm trying to try more tree tomatoes and more, they're called tamarillos. There's different colors. There's different. So like the poha berry is a really awesome one that we grow, and there's other relatives like the naranjia and pepino, and you kind of dig into those, crops that grow a little quicker and stuff. And that interests me a lot because I can use them in my landscaping in between my tree crops in like the alley rows, and I'll fill in these areas in between my actual grafted trees with all these kind of random cool things like Panama cherry and whatever else. So I'm like always on the hunt for that quick little berry or that quick little, whatever it is to fill space, if that helps.
Yeah, that's an amazing list there. I wrote down guayusa. I've heard of that before, but I think I get it confused with guarana, which is probably a very different effect. Yeah, I love
right.
it.
Yeah, no, they're actually kind of similar in their effect. Guarana is a seed, that's roasted, and it's an awesome ethnobotanical plant. I think that is found in the same regions. Yeah, guayusa is just a whole different thing. It's got this kind of thing about it for sure.
I've only seen guarana in, marketed in energy drinks that probably already have too much caffeine. So
Yeah, it's honestly, if you want like the real guarana experience, just go to like a health food store and get like there's one called Guarana Energizer by Source Naturals, and it's these pills of guarana extract, and that stuff is absolutely effective for getting you to maintain a long like road trip where you have to drive or something. It will work in such a profound way that it's almost shocking that it's available over the counter.
It's medicinal Adderall for
it really is, and it too doesn't have a nasty come down either. It's kind of bitchin'. Like guarana is another great one. That is actually on the list of stuff I need to get in the ground. I had it once and kind of lost it.
So this is kind of an interesting segue into one of the questions I wanted to talk to you about, which in general was just medicinals. But there's a few things that we talked about. You mentioned the passion flower before. Now we're getting into this world of tea and caffeine plants, which for the average temperate grower is a little bit more limited. But I think that a lot of temperate growers don't recognize that they could be growing a number of passion fruit plants that actually produce edible fruits and have incredible medicinal, effects in a number of ways, and also that we can be growing caffeine and tea plants here. So, I'd like to delve into maybe a little bit of that in terms of like one of the first obsessions I had was with passion flowers, and Ben has this sort of passion flower tincture that he promotes that I'm very excited to brew this summer when my passion flowers are, big enough to harvest from. But it's just from the cold hardy, zone 5 hardy passiflora that is not nearly as exciting as the wide range of passion flowers that you can grow in Hawaii. It's, what I'm most excited about is the maypop. And I've acquired a bunch of different varieties of it, of people who've basically created like land raised seeds in their specific area for fruit or for medicinal qualities. Do you ever utilize, your passion flowers as more than just for their edible fruits? Do you ever use them for the medicinal effects of like the leaves or the flowers? And then if you could just talk more about any other medicinal plants that you're like really excited about in your landscape.
Yeah, I love the plant. I love all the passive flower plants. I just honestly, I'm bad about using a lot of this stuff that I could for health in my landscape, primarily because at the end of the day, I'm mainly just going out and planting, and I just like to come in and have like my beverage and whatever. And there have been phases of my life where, I was way more obsessed with food preparation, and I hardly have the energy for it. And my wife, shout out to Katie, does a lot of the harvesting, and it's awesome. I make herbal teas when I can, and I use holy basil, the tulsi. I have like a number of different varieties of it. I kind of, just pick bits of each one. I add mint to it. I add lemongrass to it. Sometimes I'll use rose geranium. I'll drink a rosemary tea sometimes. I have all these herbs around, and they're along my paths, and I'll walk out and pick them to make tea. And then in the backdrop, I have like chaya and moringa and some of these ones which I really should be dehydrating them and whatever, but at the end of the day,
you're only one person, and this is like
I am, and it is, we have at least 6 acres planted, maybe 7. I have a caretaker that helps me with mowing and some weed whacking, but other than that, it's just me and Katie is more inside a lot of the time. And with the tropical rampancy, it's just, there's no way to like do all the stuff I'd like to do like that. But it's part of collecting these plants and really having them in my life is so that I can get to a point where I do use them or share them, obviously, right? So it's just like they kind of pop up on the radar, and I'll be like, hey, I'm going to use you this week. And um, and I'll do it, and then that's just one box checked off out of hundreds that I could check off, like the passion flower. I know about that and the teas and all that stuff, and it's awesome that you guys have one that works out there. There's kind of one for everywhere. It's pretty rad, really.
I think that it's a little bit more, we're lucky. We're not lucky, but we are lucky being in a cold climate, and that we are limited in how many cool things we can experiment with in weird ways. And making a purple passion flower anxiety tea is, we're limited in the amount of cool trippy teas we can make. But right. Ben, do you want to talk about that for a minute? Because I'm just, this is your story.
Yeah, just to plug Passiflora some more. It's fast becoming one of my favorite genera. Again, like, I follow the genus and on social media and the people who post about their plants and the flowers. It's got some of the most psychedelic, beautiful, bright colored, diverse flowers that I've ever seen. They look like, something an alien designed, and that a 4-year-old came up with the color scheme, because it's out of this world, the flowers. So first of all, the flowers are beautiful. The plant grows really, almost all of them that I've tried growing grow really, really well, almost too well. You kind of have to rein them in. And the fruits are delicious if you can get them the fruit in your climate. And then the last benefit that I've only discovered the last few years is if you can make a tea from the leaves, and you can make a tea from the flowers as well. But what I accidentally did one time, I don't know why I did this, but I took the flowers and just put them in a mason jar of water, left them in my fridge for about a month. The color came out into the water and didn't even degrade. So I have this mason jar of just vibrantly purple, like the most purple Kool-Aid you've ever seen, like that color.
Wow.
That's
pretty rad.
I opened it up and I was like, well, I don't really know what I made here. And I gave it a smell, and it smelled okay. And I sipped it. It had fermented in a really pleasant way. Like the only way I could describe it is it kind of had a little bit of a pickle taste to it, like the way you'd pickle, cucumbers or something. And so I drank that just to see, after testing it to make sure, because I never tried these before, to make sure I tolerated it okay, tried a little bit more. Then later in the day, I just felt like so relaxed, like more relaxed than I'd ever felt in a long time. And I was like, man, this is great. I wonder why I feel this way. And I thought back, I was like, oh, I drank a bunch of that purple drink in my refrigerator. And oh, that's right. I read about the anti-anxiety, the relaxation benefits of Passiflora. And I was growing the incense cultivar, which I think is Incarnata. So I made a video about it on my YouTube channel, The Porous Gardener. Hopefully some people tried it out. And then recently I just made a tea with the leaves. I'm growing Passiflora edulis as sort of like a green wall near my garage. So I took some leaves, and the same thing happened. Just like I was just relaxing on my couch and having a grand old time for about an hour and a half, and just felt very relaxed, very grounded. And so I'd recommend trying that to anyone who is looking to, I'm not a big fan of relying on herbs every single day to get you through the day to relax, but occasionally you want something extra to help. So I'd recommend people try that. You don't want to mess around with Passiflora caerula, which is toxic. And there's also some reports of unripe, the inner flesh of the fruits of some of these other species being kind of toxic as well, but there's some conflicting information. But if you have Passiflora incarnata, if you have Passiflora edulis, and probably plenty of other species, you should be good to go, but you might just want to do a little bit of research before self-medicating, let's put it that way. But yeah,
I think there's some sort of like MAO inhibitor thing too. I'm not sure how that relates to medication and stuff, but yeah, it's true. Like herbs are powerful. That's basically what it comes down to. Yeah, it's like you gotta know what they are.
Other herbs, like I love holy basil, and I know that that's supposed to be a stress reliever and adaptogenic, but I feel nice after drinking holy basil, but I never really like felt too much of an effect. But yeah, passion flower definitely does it for me. Mike, did you have any other questions on like the medicinal stuff, or I have a kind of unrelated question if we could go to that?
Well, I think we should go to your question. I just wanted to say that I planted Passiflora caerulea today and had no idea that it wasn't, I didn't know it was toxic, and I feel kind of foolish for planting it now. But
oh yeah, that's something to, when you're planting these plants out and stuff, you like learning about the toxicities is kind of like a good rule of thumb, because there's some powerful stuff in a lot of plants, like the seeds or something, of star fruit are toxic, and the seeds of soursop are toxic, and yeah, there's a lot of different things like that where if you like made a smoothie and
rhubarb leaves, you make a rhubarb leaf smoothie.
Yeah, it's oxalates too are a big thing. Like a lot of people get a little happy about some different perennial greens and stuff, but it's like you got to check like all this stuff is fine for eating like once a week or something, but you can't just eat it like every night. Like you can eat lettuce every night, if it has a lot of oxalates and different things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting subject getting into like some of the disclaimers around some of these things, which kind of you just get the memo like they're just healthy, but then you start to look below the radar a little. Like there was like soursop was like that, where there was a whole viral thing like soursop leaves are anti-cancer in a tea, and there was a whole big splash about it, and people were buying soursop and whatever. But if you do research on it, soursop is actually like got some mildly sketchy compounds, and you don't really want to eat it super regularly.
We know all about the sketchy compounds. The temperate climate perennial vegetables are full of sketchy compounds. But no.
Well, okay, can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah.
Have you heard of gruit?
Yes. I've drank it.
So,
I've drank it.
Well, there's breweries that brew it now, but in a nutshell, like the herbs that composed it back in the day, from what I understand, a lot of the main ones, and I could reference a book real quick to bring some of them up, but they are kind of not necessarily things that you would want to consume maybe as regularly as people did back then. And some of them were like very abortive and things like that. But they're fascinating plants, and if I was in your guys' neck of the woods, I would try to collect those and try to get into that world, because what breweries are making is just like they're adding a few things that were kind of additions, but like the backbone herbs, like the hops of gruit, were these kind of mildly intoxicating, inebriating herbs, kind of like how you brought up Passiflora. Like it has that relaxant quality that makes you kind of just giddy and feel good, without like you're not necessarily like high. Yeah, the gruit, some of these gruit herbs are kind of operating along some of those lines.
I drank gruit at the fermentary distillery brewery. It's the like Forest Farm Fermentary or something like that in Portland, Maine, and they had gruit, and they're like taking every delicious flower and fermenting it into whatever they so choose. Anyways, Ben, what was your question for Adam?
So one thing that I've learned about the tropics and growing and species selection is in the tropics, people have to really look at elevation, like appropriate elevation for certain plants, and compare that to where they're growing. And that's not something growing in the temperate climates that I've ever had to think about. So is elevation, do you treat it just sort of like cold hardiness? As elevation is higher up, you're going to experience colder temperatures and maybe less humidity. And so if, a plant is rated for 1,000 meters or above, and you're below that just means you can't grow it? Or are there ways to get around those requirements? And is it something that you even really pay attention to?
Yeah, it's something in Big Island that we take into consideration a lot because of how unique our environment is, and that from the sea level to the, up on the foothills of the highest part of the mountain, we have all these different climatic zones. So we can grow most things here, just in a nutshell. Like we could almost grow everything here. We could grow saffron at the higher elevations. We can definitely grow any of the stone fruit. And then as you go down, you're in like perfect country to grow cherimoya. Certain kinds of fruit do pretty good at that like 1500 to 2500 band, kind of like more like mulberries. And the sun doesn't shine as bright up there, so you'll start to see the trunks will get a lot of moss on them and stuff, but trees will still persist and put out fruit. Then you get down, into the lower elevation, and it kind of really just opens you up to that entire universe of exotic fruit, really. And that elevation is what I call like the coconut elevation, where if you plant some coconut trees, you're going to guaranteed get some nuts and be able to drink them. Whereas if you try to do that up 1500 and above, you're not going to be drinking coconuts. And you just got to, work with what you got up there that's going to work good up there. And you'll maybe be able to grow more like Andean tubers and like interesting things up there better. And down here, they'll probably just like rot out from the rains and the low elevation kind of aspects of humidity. It's probably crisper up there, and it's real nice, when you get up into those higher elevations up here. But yeah, you can't really coax durian out of them no matter what trick you try to. You're gonna want to just try to grow what grows good for you. And down here, you can coax more stuff by giving it super good drainage or planting it in a mounded elevation. Like you can plant durian and avocados like to where you make a big mound off of the ground, and actually the top of the root ball sits at least a few inches above ground. And that will allow you to prevent some of the more devastating fungal pathogens that we get out here.
Adam, what elevation are you for?
We're like 450.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
when you're talking about making these raised mounds, do you utilize sort of like the Seppholzer hugelkultur kind of method at all, or describe a little bit more what you're doing to keep these plants happy in the raised areas?
Oh yeah. Sorry, it's not quite like that. It's like you're getting whatever topsoil you have. When you dig a hole, you're setting that aside, and then you got some subsoil that's not that great, and you're gonna like amend it with some stuff and make the drainage better, make it fluffier, and then you're gonna take that topsoil you set aside and mix it with a bunch of compost or something, and then you're gonna have like a nice circle that you could maybe hug about size like 3 feet out or so, and you're gonna have that raised above the ground. So it's really just like you're adding enough material to where it's a kind of, it adds a bit more work, but in the end that tree just is less likely to get wet feet, and if you were doing something where you're creating like a berm of material and stuff out here, like the hugelkultur and stuff, there's a lot of factors to consider, and things that could go wrong out here,
Well, what I was going to say is that in sort of this like internet permaculture discourse, there's a lot of talk about using or combining swales and hugelkultur as this like, it saves the day method. And I feel like Yeah, there is. And there's also some pushback saying like, no, that's a horrible idea. Do not do that. Do not. So
Yeah, I think those people that are commenting in afterward are probably like people who have like done it, or like people who have like seen people do it or something. Because it's like, yeah, like stuff can go wrong when you're putting a bunch of material in like something that floods in a peak season, of rain. I mean, as long as nobody gets hurt, I bet it would just be a bunch of material you got to clean up or something, kind of sprawled everywhere, which would be sad after putting in like that amount of hugelkultur time,
Yeah, I think it's just very important to sort of like take into context a lot of the teachings that are freely available to people who want to. Well, a lot of the teachings that are freely available to people who want to delve into this world. It's all really reliant upon the climate, and more than just the climate, the landscape of where you are. And so you who are, you're on a large a slope on a shield volcano in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's going to be very different than the Austrian Alps, where someone who might just look up and say, oh, hugelkultur, like on a hill, like that looks great, let's implement it in my landscape. It's these things are very reliant upon a large number of factors.
Yeah. There's not a lot of like stuff marketed towards the tropics, like we have this unique thing we have, and a lot of the information that's out there isn't about us, and that's cool. It's just, it's hard to like get to the bottom of it, of doing tropical permaculture. And ultimately when you learn about it, you kind of find these like little niche resources in the corner of things, and you're blown away, and you absorb them and make them your practice in like a way that you never probably would most other things that you'd come across, because it's just, that's all you got. You're like, dang, these guys are doing it in this one remote part of Vietnam. I'm going to try this ground cover, and this is going to be the one that like sticks, and it's a trip. Like, and if I type in permaculture, there's not going to be a lot that comes up talking about my environment. But, like up in Queensland, they got a similar thing going, and the full tropics isn't discussed as much. And we have a lot of the plants that you guys have too, like a lot of your hardiest plants we can grow too. It's just a totally different world. And I think, people, like, you bite off way more than you can chew out. It's like much easier to bite off way more than you can chew out here. That's what I'll say about it.
That's how I feel right now with like 40 containers that I seeded stuff during February. Seeds that I put out in February, and these like little humidity domes that are still sitting there. And these are perennials that are like not large enough to plant out into my property even now in frickin' June. So yeah, biting off a lot more than you chew. I don't know, man. I feel like we've had a great session. This has been like an hour and a half so far, but and I've pretty much asked the majority of my questions. If anything, I look forward to sharing with you some of the plants that I'm most excited about that I know can grow in your climate, like purple tree collard. And I don't know, I'll fly out there with some cuttings next time I come. But Ben, do you have any more questions? And if you do, like if there's 2 or 3 of them, like let's just go with it. But do you have any more questions for Adam?
I think the main one is, would you want to do a part 2 sometime? This has been a really great conversation, and you seem really knowledgeable and passionate, just like Mike and I.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Ben. It was awesome talking to you guys. I'd be happy to talk to you guys another time for sure. And when I do, I'd like to hear more about what you guys are doing out there, and some of the stuff you guys are getting deep into. Because I'm not just crazy about these plants. I like to know about all the different stuff. And if something like strikes my attention enough, I'm like, I'll try to grow that. I'll try to figure that out.
Ben, why don't you tell Adam about your crazy non-tuber producing sweet potato, just like on that note?
Oh, yeah. That story, that's a good one. So I heard Eric Tonesmeyer in his talk. He spoke about sweet potato as a as a vegetable for the edible leaves, for the stalks, and that was a long time ago. And I always knew you could eat the leaves and stems of regular sweet potato. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I heard in another talk him mention that there were certain varieties from the Philippines and maybe other parts of Southeast Asia that were varieties that were like bred or cultivated specifically as a vegetable that both have like better tasting, more tender stems and greens, but also because they're not dumping energy into their tubers, they're actually, spending more of that energy growing their vegetative parts. And so I was like, all right, well, I love a good plant hunt and I love trying to find something that shows no Google results when you try to search it up. So a couple days and tracked down a nursery that specialized in sweet potatoes, and they no longer offered that on their website, like the variety that I was looking for. But I found something from like 2004 when they one year in their catalog, they offered this particular variety they just called Asian greens. So I emailed them and they're like, yeah, I don't think we have that anymore. I'm not quite sure. I'm like, okay, well, if you do find it, if you look and you don't see it, thanks anyway. But if you are able to stumble across it, I would love to buy it. And, whatever price you think is fair. And sure enough, a couple of days later, like, oh, you know what? In the way back of our farm, we actually still have that growing, or in their greenhouses. I can't remember. And they sent me some cuttings, and it delivered as promised. It grows very, very fast, kind of like maybe not quite as fast as that grass that you talked about, but it provides ample greens throughout the year. Nothing seems to slow it down except the first frost. And then I just basically take cuttings that will, of course, root in 24 hours, maybe shorter. I'll take cuttings and grow it as a house plant indoors. It doesn't really like, the cooler temperatures or not having enough sunlight, but it survives. And then I just plant out the cuttings in the spring and get another huge, beautiful ground cover of these big, like cordate green leaves. And yeah, they're delicious. And it's nice just to always have vegetables, some sort of vegetable growing throughout the year, from early in the spring to late in the fall. And so maybe I'll send some. I might have already sent some to Mike. I can't remember, but when he goes out to Hawaii, maybe you can bring that in. You can import some of those sweet potatoes.
I'm just imagining how big they would get, and like they could be like potentially invasive or something. Like just like
well, that's serious matter. Like sometimes out here, like I think those sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that family. Is it Ipomea?
Moea.
Yeah, those guys can be very rambunctious. Yeah, and I think some of them are on the noxious weed list. Like that Kangkong I brought up to Mike. That one I think is on the noxious weed list, which surprised me. And yeah, I'd be curious. Like, do you know the Latin name of? Is it just like a sweet potato and it's just a different cultivar, or does it have a different?
I believe so. Yeah, Sapomoea batatas, and I mean,
okay.
It's just like a sweet potato, except when you dig it up, it has more like net roots, and it does have little tubers, I guess, but they're like, I don't know, the size of like your pinky finger.
Oh, interesting. I'd like to see a picture of the foliage because we actually had this variety that I stopped growing because it was so vigorous of a vegetative grower, and it would just make these meager little tubers, And I use a lot of them in my landscape design, as a ground cover. And this one would climb cages, like my fruit tree cages. It would like climb up the cages and go just colonize the whole cage like a twining vine,
Yeah, from what this one behaves itself fairly well because the stems are kind of erect. They're not super flexible. They kind of just are crispy and break off. But I also harvested it so heavily that maybe it didn't have a chance to take over my cages and things like that. But yeah, I'll send you some photos.
Cool. Yeah, I'd like to see that. Yeah, we got a yellow variety that we really like out here. It's just like the traditional kind of yam looking sweet potato, and it's not like Hawaiian or anything, but we do have one of the Hawaiian cultivars, which just makes a huge sweet potato that's white inside.
Yeah, they're sweet. Now I want to eat some sweet potatoes.
Yeah, no, it's great when we have them around. They're such a great crop, and the pigs will dig them up if we don't plant them in a
I'm sure.
protected place. And then the leaves a lot of the time get pretty bad mite damage, and like in the agroforestry systems I have going on there. But they hold the post, they get it off the ground, and that's really what's key.
Before we close up here, I just want to say, Adam, do you remember that sort of ornamental mulberry tree planted out front of my grandparents' house? Do you recall that one when we visited?
I remember you showing me a picture of it.
That mulberry tree that supposedly doesn't have very tasty fruit, surprisingly has like the most delicious like tree leaves I've ever had. Like, tastes better than spinach or even like raw lettuce. And I've tried them on 2 or 3 occasions now and just been absolutely blown away. And talk about like a cold climate species that has been overlooked. I mean, we're talking about sweet potato, but for the edible greens. And Ben and I had previously talked about this, but I just wanted to kind of clue you in that we just walked right past it and we're like, oh cool, mulberry tree. But now, oh my god, like the leaf, I had no idea at the time that mulberry leaves were even edible. And they're not only edible, but apparently delicious when it comes to whatever certain cultivars.
Yeah, they're a substitute for grape leaves in the dolmas in the Greek restaurants. Yeah, they're awesome. I'm a fan. I've like for tea and stuff, I've never I don't know if that is a better variety or they're all good or what. A lot of the time we get powdery mildew on the foliage out here, so you guys are lucky you don't have that problem as much.
Yeah, no, the powdery mildew mostly just messes with the zucchini and whatnot. But in any case, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for talking with us. For any listeners, we've been speaking with Adam Crowe of ʻāina Exotics, and you can check out Adam's website at ʻāinaexotics.com. Is that right?
Yep, ʻāina Exotics, AINA Exotics, and we're on Etsy as well. We have a little store. We have seeds and cuttings available, and we have Rollinia on there, for instance, is one of the seeds we sell, and just put some cool different guavas up on there.
It'll be ever evolving, I'm sure.
No, yeah, it's in a bare bones stage right now, but as if you consider all the things that are in the ground over here, it's going to be quite a store one day. I'm super stoked to get out there and see what you guys have collected too. And it was good chatting with you, Ben. I hope to touch base in the future too. Thanks Michael, for hosting us.
No worries.
Well, until part, have a good evening, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, my friend. Have a good one. Aloha. Blessings.
Aloha.